news for some. The notorious one-time cocaine kingpin of D.C., Rayful Edmond, has been released from a federal prison. Edmond served more than 3 decades of a life sentence, his crimes helping to inspire our City Under Siege coverage in the 1980s. But Edmond has also worked as a government informant, leading in part to his early release. Fox 5's Bob Barnard is live in Northeast D.C. with all the details. Bob?
Hey there, Shamari. Rayful Edmonds' base of operations was in this Northeast D.C. neighborhood around 4th and M Street. The Federal Bureau of Prisons today says that Rayful Edmond was released from custody yesterday and transferred to a halfway house. They're not saying where, but the Bureau's Nashville, Tennessee office is now in charge of his case. You're about to hear from a longtime D.C. activist who says he's known Rayful Edmonds for years, and he spoke to him yesterday.
He told me he's going to a halfway house. You know, he didn't say where, but he said he'd get back with me.
I'm back better than ever.
This is video that's been circulating on social media today, purported to be the now 59-year-old Rayful Edmond in an airport, just having been released from prison.
When I spoke to him, he was in the airport, you know, going to get ready to get on another plane.
We spoke to Tyrone Parker today. He's a founding member of a D.C.-based organization called Alliance of Concerned Men and has known Rayful Edmond for years, since he became a federal prisoner.
He's doing well. He's happy, as you can almost imagine. It's a miracle that he's home.
Rayful Edmond was arrested at age 24, sentenced in federal court in 1990 to life in prison for basically introducing crack cocaine to D.C., helping the city earn the title the murder capital of the U.S. in the 1980s, convicted of running a criminal enterprise of about 150 people, raking in $300 million a year, responsible for the murders of at least 30 people. Speaking to Fox 5 in prison shortly after his conviction.
From what I've been reading in the newspaper, seeing on the news, Washington, D.C. is worse than it was when we was out on the street, so how could it be us?
But Edmond received another 30-year sentence for dealing massive amounts of drugs from his Pennsylvania prison cell. Now, many years later, his petition to be released from prison early has been granted. Jason Downs has been Edmond's attorney for the past 7 years.
He feels that he has served, and we believe that Mr. Edmond has served and paid his debt to society.
Let's give the man a chance. Yeah, some terrible things occurred that he was a part of. But we're talking about 33 years ago.
Mr. Parker says Edmond seems remorseful and told him he wants to now give back to the community.
Bob, I'm looking to take help from anybody that I would think that could help to stop the killing. I cannot afford to have selective morality. He's done his 33 years, and he deserves a second chance. And if he can help to save one person, that's good enough for me.
Now, there are many other people who are not happy with today's development. Some of them, frankly, didn't want to go on camera and talk to us. Rayful Edmond was, for a long time, a government informant, and his information helped to put other drug dealers here in D.C. behind bars. And yet, guys, when he left prison, he did not do so under an assumed name or in the witness protection program.
Yeah. Yo, this is a very interesting story. For the people that don't know, you know, Rayful Edmonds, let me go to his let me just look him up so I can read this off to you guys, right? Yeah, Rayful Edmonds was a young man essentially in his 20s when he was arrested along with many others in a, FBI sweep of the city, where they targeted one main organization, well, two organizations that kind of work together. Let me see here. Let me see if they got something on him up here on Wiki. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go to chat GDP. Hey, Andrea. Let me see here. I can pull this up. What I thought was interesting here, though, for one, is that Rayful. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Rayful Edmonds. Yeah, he oh, wait a second. I'm sorry. Rayful Edmonds. Okay, here we go. Let me pull this up for y'all real quick here on the screen. This is a big story to folks in Washington D.C. Because this guy's organization, or his co-organization, one of his, you could say, partners, was released maybe 3-4 years ago, just recently also, but he didn't cooperate with the authorities, really ironic which is really ironic in this case. It's a lot of interesting things about this case, because this case is it's very strange even on the U.S. level, because the time that they was issued, like Rayful Edmonds, for his crime, and he wasn't really he hadn't really had a big criminal record or anything like that prior to this. His sentence was for 40 years to life, basically. And you know, typically when we follow these kind of drug kingpin stories across the U.S., you're hearing things. You're hearing more things like 30 years being given out. But in this case, it was 40 years, and that's just one of the things. But let me read this. Let me play this for you guys so you can hear a little bit about him.
Rayful Edmonds, a notorious figure in Washington, D.C. during the 1980s, was a major drug dealer who played a significant role in the city's crack cocaine epidemic. Born in 1964, Edmonds became one of the most prominent and wealthy drug lords in the area, with his operation making millions of dollars annually. Here are some key points about Rayful Edmonds. 1. Rise to power. Edmonds' drug empire grew rapidly, and at its peak, he was reportedly making up to $2 million per week. His operation was highly organized, with a large network of dealers and enforcers. 2. Impact on Washington, D.C. The influx of crack cocaine during the 1980s had a devastating impact on many communities in Washington, D.C., leading to increased crime rates and social issues. 3. Arrest and cooperation. In 1989, Edmonds was arrested and eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, he later cooperated with federal authorities, providing information that led to the arrests and convictions of several corrupt police officers and fellow drug dealers. This cooperation resulted in a reduction of his sentence. 4. Cultural impact. Rayful Edmonds' life and criminal activities have been the subject of various media portrayals, including documentaries and books. His story is often cited as an example of the excesses and dangers of the drug trade in urban America during the crack epidemic. 5. Current status. Edmonds' cooperation with authorities significantly altered his sentence, and he has been under witness protection. Rayful Edmonds' story is a stark illustration of the complexities and tragedies associated with the drug trade and its far-reaching consequences on communities.
Right. So I was wrong, yo. I forgot, he was given life in prison, and that's almost unheard of. So it's important to note those things when people look into this story. How old was Rayful? I think he was like 20, even 23 or 24 when he went to prison. Rayful Edmonds, when he was locked up in DC. All right, let's see here. Yeah, he was 20. No, wait a second. He was 24 years old. So try to imagine 24 years old and you getting life without the possibility of parole. And that was unheard of at that time. It was unheard of after that time, pretty much. And so you could safely say Rayful Edmonds received one of the largest penalties of any, kingpin drug dealer in the country for that, pretty much. There might be a couple of others, but let me tell you, normally people are getting 30 years to life for the crimes that he committed, that he's alleged to have committed. And of course, he admitted that he did these things. So largely, most of these things he was charged with. But yeah, but they gave him life without the possibility of parole. So he spent obviously 30 something years in jail. And I actually signed a petition for the possibility of release. And when did I do that? That was when I was in, I think that was in 2019. I believe it was 2019. And because they had been talking about how unjust the sentencing was for a long time. Now, it is said that he cooperated with the authorities, after some time. And who knows? People are going to have to ask him why he decided to do that, because obviously that's a lot of the cats that are involved in that lifestyle um, in prison. They wouldn't be looking to highly. They wouldn't look highly up to that. So yeah, and even in the neighborhood, but cities change and people change, and I thought just all of them were done kind of dirty. That was my personal view of it. I did not blame them for the crime in DC like the government blamed them, or the nation. It's not even the I don't even think it's not even the district government that blame them for crime in DC, because obviously, if you know DC history, crime has been in DC long before Rayful Edmonds was even born. You see what I'm saying? He was born into a situation that already had cocaine, heroin, and other types of drugs. Being there's been drugs in DC. We discussed this before for a long time. Mafias of different types: Italian mafia, Irish mafia, black mafias in DC since the early 1900s. You see what I'm saying? Or mid 1900s, which would be late 1900s, the turn of the century, let's say 1900, right? Turn of the century. So it's always been crime there. It's the capital. Um, and as far as a lot of black people are concerned, like this, I myself, even though I'm 55, I'm the part of the first generation to grow up in a desegregated DC. So that means my parents, um, in their generation, the city was segregated. You see what I mean? So these things push a lot of black people towards cooperating in a lot of different ways, not just legal ways, but also illegal ways. And DC is a city that's kind of has a history like that, right? Now, yeah, another thing, he is released. They said he was released.
News today. Startling news for some.
They said he was released to a halfway house, and he's not in witness protection anymore. He opted out of that. That is very interesting because, and it's not surprising though to me. I'm gonna tell you, because although, um, although he committed the crimes um, that he said he committed, um, he was actually very loved in D.C. for, Rayful Edmonds was loved and by many, and so he wasn't seen as a evil person or a bad person. He wasn't seen that way, and most of the people um, didn't have any negative impression of him. You see what I mean? Outside of maybe people don't want to be involved in crime when they know you're a drug lord. They don't want their children being hurt or their students being hurt by associating with you. But outside of that, people didn't see him. He was not a goon type. Rayful Edmonds wasn't walking around. He was more likely to smile, say hello, how you doing, sir? How you doing, ma'am? These kind of things, not like what you see today. You see what I mean? So it's kind of like a different generation, a different class or different way of being, And the brother was very articulate, very intelligent. And I'm not trying to say he's very, outshined a whole lot of people, because I think DC have a lot of people like this. It's the capital. Come on, you think people just going to be living in the capital for generations and they're not going to know how, get a leg up in some things in business or in civil society or things like this, right? Entrepreneurship or whatever. DC's always had entrepreneurs, from Black entrepreneurs. It always has had. So criminal and legal, right? So it's not really a shock. But having said that, I think that it's very likely that I said this yesterday too, that even though he knows it's a possibility he could die, he would rather face it like a man and face it in his own city with his own people, because I believe he loves that city. He loves DC, not in a way that is kind of superficial either. You see what I mean? Like Rayful Edmonds of all people knows that he broke a code that same world that he lived in takes seriously, and he knows what the consequences of that, and he knows that there's people that he sent to jail, even through his testimony, that are still in jail today, and some have been released. He knows all of that. Trust me, he know all of that. So he's released, and he's not in police protection, and they're letting you know he's in a halfway house. And let me tell you, and just from listening to this, I already know where he at. You see what I'm saying? I already know where he is. You see? So I just want to put that out there. Now, I'm not judging him, because I know how the cats that's involved in, that have involved themselves in that life and gone to prison, they're not going to look highly, period, on snitching at all. They're not going to. They're just not going to, because believe it or not, they still trying to survive. Everybody else is still trying to survive now, from the aftermath, but at the same time, it's going to be interesting, because I don't think that I don't think that the same people would be out to harm him. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just have that feeling like they may not associate with him. They may not accept him. They may have personal beefs with him due to criminal things that have gone on. But I don't think, it seemed to me like he's willing to face all of that, whatever comes with being released. And it seemed like he's sending a message to people like, you know where I am, you know where I'm going to be. I'm not in witness protection, and I'm letting everybody know that I'm out today at the airport. Here I go, y'all. And he seemed like he wishing people a positive, not going too far out there, but just, trying to move on, but we're going to see. We're going to see. Once again, let me play this.
The notorious
Hold on.
cocaine kingpin.
Wait a second. Let me play the second one.
Step closer to freedom. The Bureau of Prisons confirms Rayful Edmond III is now either in a halfway house or confined to his home. It is hard to fully explain how many lives were cut short or changed forever by the way Edmond ran his drug ring on the streets, how his decisions rippled across the district. 5 years ago, my dear friend and colleague, the late Bruce Johnson, anchored a half-hour special on Edmond, and I wanted to share part of that with you tonight.
Wherever there was a corner, you could buy crack.
Keeping it real, we were overwhelmed. When the crack epidemic hit, the DC Police Department wasn't ready for it.
When crack was the hustle here in the nation's capital back in the 1980s, nobody, absolutely nobody, worked harder than Rayful Edmond III. In court, prosecutors said Edmond's enterprise brought in several hundred kilos of cocaine per month. It's believed that at its peak, his crack empire was allegedly taking in as much as $300 million per year.
It was hell for a minute.
Here, there was nonstop drug dealing, slingers on the street,
24/7, and you had violence that would break out as young men and teenagers fought for turf.
24-year-old Rayful Edmonds reportedly controlled as much as 60% of the crack market in D.C. He reportedly had more than 150 people on the payroll at one point. Rayful was never accused of murder, but no fewer than 30 slayings were blamed on his associates. The wars over crack territories helped send the district's homicide rate through the roof, 400 per year, earning the city the dubious title of murder capital of the world.
And that was Bruce Johnson. And what you just saw was an excerpt from his 2019 special, Rayful Edmond, D.C.'s crack kingpin 30 years later. Unfortunately, that whole half hour isn't available for us to post on our website or the WUSA 9 Plus app for you tonight. But the team that brings you this show has a plan to make that happen in the next day or two, so watch for that.
Yeah, hey, Andrea. Yeah, well, in the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, most people heard of this guy. And I think, in reality, on the East Coast, most people heard of this guy. And, but then again, he's been locked up for 30-something years. You see what I mean? And, he did go to jail. How old was he when he was arrested? He was 24 years old. So try to imagine what life is like at 24 years old. Now, 24 years old, think about this. 24 years old, you have, they're calling you the kingpin, right? And of course he admitted to that. There's a lot of things he admitted to. But, you got to ask yourself, how could this really be 24? To me, when I listen to a lot of this stuff, I just tend to think that the justice system was more eager to criminalize people. To be honest, I mean, that it's just my feeling. I'm not giving an excuse for the behavior, though. I'm just saying, when I listen to some of the media, and even look at his sentence, he got life in prison. Life in prison. There's loads of people from that same period that just as dangerous, quote unquote, right, doing the same things, who got life in prison. You see what I mean? I mean, it would shock you, but he did, and then he cooperated. They say he cooperated at first because his mother was locked up. She was implicated. His own mother was implicated in having knowledge, a certain level of knowledge, some kind of knowledge. So they could use her as a pawn, essentially. And they did. They locked her up too. And others, many others, you see. There was a lot of stories. There's a lot of stories about this now. Where Rayful, lived is just like on the edge, just where Capitol Hill ends. That's right where his neighborhood is, where he grew up in Northeast, right? And he went to Dunbar High School, And I'm not going to give you the whole history about him because people can find out more on their own. But the way they talk about it, it's almost like they removed the factors of racial discrimination, systemic discrimination, and they're so eager to describe these people in a certain light. Like, they're just chaotic. They're just this way. Lord, how did we get this way? Wow, this is just crime. We just have to put it into it. Well, we have to look at the factors that feed this. And one of the main factors that fed this was the concept that you could get money from this, that anybody could make money from this. It was like a gold rush, apparently, when you listen to people, and it was. You see, people didn't have a concept of what will come after, the effects later. I mean, a 24-year-old man, do you think a 24-year-old would know that necessarily? Right? And because look at the penalty they gave him, life, as if he had lived much life. The man has lived more of his life in prison than out on the streets, than free, first of all. And it's not just him, but he got that life sentence. And others did too. Now, let me see. I'm just going to pivot here for 2 seconds. Tony Lewis was the other brother that was his considered to be like his partner. Even though they were two different organizations, they kind of rounded them up as one. Or they rounded up like 2, 3 different or 4 different ones and just kind of gave Rayful the face of the operation. Tony Lewis, let me see here. Tony Lewis Sr. Here, I will let this pop up on the screen so people can hear what they said. Tony Lewis was released just a few years ago, not many years ago, just like maybe 3 years ago, something 4 years ago. It was very recent. So let's hear about his partner, Tony Lewis, for a second, just to give you an idea.
Tony Lewis Sr. was a prominent drug kingpin in Washington, D.C. during the 1980s, closely associated with Rayful Edmonds. Together, they were major players in the city's crack cocaine epidemic. Here are some key points about Tony Lewis Sr. 1. Partnership with Rayful Edmonds. Tony Lewis Sr. worked alongside Rayful Edmonds in running one of the largest and most profitable drug operations in Washington, D.C. Their partnership allowed them to dominate the local drug market, making millions of dollars from the sale of crack cocaine. 2. Impact on the community. Like Edmonds, Lewis had a significant impact on Washington, D.C. neighborhoods, contributing to the rise in crime and the social and economic challenges faced by many residents during the crack epidemic. 3. Arrest and conviction. In 1989, both Edmonds and Lewis were arrested. Tony Lewis Sr. was subsequently convicted and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole for his role in the drug trafficking operation. 4. Family and legacy. Tony Lewis Sr.'s life and criminal activities have had lasting effects on his family. His son, Tony Lewis Jr., has become an advocate for criminal justice reform and has written about his experiences growing up with a father who was a notorious drug kingpin. Tony Lewis Jr. works to support families affected by mass incarceration and to provide opportunities for those returning to society after serving time in prison. 5. Cultural and social commentary. The story of Tony Lewis Sr. is often cited in discussions about the impact of the war on drugs, the crack epidemic, and the long-term consequences of mass incarceration on African American communities. Tony Lewis Sr.'s life story, like that of Rayful Edmonds, serves as a powerful example of the far-reaching effects of the drug trade and the importance of addressing the root causes of drug addiction and crime in urban areas.
Right now, so you hear his partner also got life in prison, not 30 years, not, their initial sentences were life in prison. Only after some reforms came later, which was recent, was Tony Lewis allowed to be released. And he spent roughly like 30 years in prison himself, right? But he did not cooperate. And so this is the irony of it. The person who cooperated in this case actually spent more time, right, behind bars. Of course, use different mechanisms to get released. The same, I guess. Once they made some reforms, they could look back and say, "Wait a second, does life in prison? Where does this fit in the justice system today? Was this too harsh?" Yes. So they reduced it, but the issue is that Rayful Edmonds continued to sell drugs when he went into prison. When he went into prison, they alleged that he sold more drugs from inside of prison than he did outside. And I guess for his cooperation regarding that, and a few other things, maybe some things loosely attached to that, he was released, right? And now you're seeing him released. He's just released yesterday. He's in a halfway house. So let me know what you think about that, what you think about these kind of stories. Also, do you think he deserved a right, being locked up at 24 years old, another chance at life? Or do you think he should be locked up for more time? And, what's your views Me myself, I just think we gotta turn the page on this situation and try to find a way to just get young kids to understand that, dealing in drugs and narcotics is not the kind of future that you want for yourself. And we got to find a way to be organized and involved in business in other ways, and also powerful ways, equally powerful ways, if need be, just like everyone else. But the drug game is just a game where they snatch everything from you, and that's exactly what they did. They snatched everything, family members, anybody, anything they could. And the story may not always be told in the public sphere as it actually really went down. You see, having said that, I'm going to be out. But one other thing I wanted to say is that again, I find it very interesting that Rayful has chosen to not be under police protection, witness protection. He's in a halfway house where he's going to have to deal with everybody else the same way, since he's not under that protection, and his entrance into the community is not assisted by the police. It's just like every other person that's coming out of jail from DC have to pretty much go along with. Once you become a felon, you got to go to a halfway house pretty much on these kind of charges, and find your way back into society whichever way you can. And it's likely he's going to speak. But then again, there's a lot of people in DC right now that have been released for the same type of activities associated with Rayful Edmonds that maybe did not snitch and actually do advocate towards kids to stay away from drugs. So it's going to be interesting to see how this works out. Yeah, but let me just show y'all what he looks like today. I posted this yesterday, and let me see here. It gave people a picture. He took a photograph in an airport, and I'm not sure what airport that was, but it was an airport, and in the U.S. Well, if it's in D.C., I'm thinking it's in Dulles or a national airport, but both of them right outside of DC, like 10 minutes to 20 minutes outside of DC. But this is what Ray looked like today, and upon his release. So here you go, folks.